What's up, y'all? It's GC Kinsey, here with a question I want to challenge you to think about. When is gender relevant? So last year I met one of my non-binary friend's parents who said something really interesting to me that has lived in my mind rent-free since then, which was having a non-binary kid has made me realize that gender is nowhere near as relevant as I always thought it was. Mind blown, am I right? Because that is such a true statement, but even as a trans person who talks a lot about trans issues, I had never thought about gender in that way until I heard it articulated by this cisgender person. So now I want to dig deeper into that and explore the question of when is gender relevant. I ask myself that question during every customer service interaction ever. When a cashier says, "Have a good day, ma'am," I think, how is my gender relevant to buying groceries? When a server says, "Can I take your order, ma'am?" I think, how is my gender relevant to what I want to eat? When a staff member at the bank or the pharmacy or the hotel I'm trying to book insists on calling me Miss Kinsey, I think, what does my gender have to do with the reason why I called you? Like, even if these people weren't guessing my gender completely wrong, what would it matter in any of those situations? And why do so many people insist on inserting gender into interactions where it's totally irrelevant? Yes, you could argue that no one is trying to misgender you, they're just trying to be polite. But that still begs the question, what does gender have to do with politeness? And isn't it more polite not to put gendered assumptions that may or may not be accurate onto people who never asked for them? So yeah, customer service interactions are where I see this happen the most. And sometimes it goes beyond just calling customers ma'am and sir or Mr. and Miss. Like one time I went to pick up an order of holiday cards I was going to send out to family and friends, and it was a big order, 60 cards. And the cashier saw this and said, "Wow, you're going to be a busy girl." What does my gender have to do with sending out these cards? Why not just say you're going to be busy? When I was at the pool one night, another swimmer was in the lane I had reserved, so the lifeguard was like, "Excuse me, she has this lane booked." And when I pointed to the mask I was wearing with my pronouns on it and said, "I'm actually a he, not a she," the lifeguard went, "I don't care, I'm just trying to get you your lane," and walked away. And I'm thinking, okay, if you don't care about my gender, why did you bring it up in the first place? You could have just said, "Another swimmer has this lane booked." Or you could have read the pronouns on my face, which I only display there so that when people do insist on bringing up my gender, they can at least get it right, but no. And this kind of thing happens out of the blue in other conversations too. For example, when I was hanging out under the 15-minute observation window after getting my COVID vaccine, the nurse on duty was just making conversation with the patients and asked me, "Do you have a job or are you a stay-at-home mom?" And my response was, "I'm not even a woman, much less a mom." But what I was thinking was, if your job is to observe patients for adverse reactions to a vaccine, what does any of our genders have to do with that? Also, what a bizarre way to phrase the simple question of what do you do for a living, especially to a random stranger. Another kind of similar example, one time I was on a call with a client at work and we were just chatting about our holiday plans before the meeting got started. And out of nowhere, this client goes, "Are you a mom?" Which again, could have been phrased as, "Are you a parent? Do you have kids?" Some other way of asking for that same information without assuming I'm a woman, which I'm not. Unfortunately, because I'm not out yet at work, there is literally nothing I can do when something like this happens. I just have to disassociate through the massive waves of dysphoria until the workday is over and I can process it. And getting misgendered like that at work catches me so off guard every time because it so rarely happens. Because my gender has nothing to do with my job whatsoever. There's no real reason to even mention it. So anytime someone does mention it in the workplace, it feels really uncomfortable and low-key unprofessional to me. Beyond these types of interactions, I also find myself asking when is gender relevant anytime I fill out a form that has a gender box. I wonder, why are they asking for that and what are they going to do with my answer? Can I even put an accurate answer? If not, can I leave it blank? And when they say gender, do they mean the gender I actually am, the gender on my legal documents, the gender I was assigned at birth? Because those would have different answers. I find this society that constantly shoves gender into everything, whether it's relevant or not, really challenging to navigate as a trans person, specifically a non-binary trans person. Because all the assumptions this society tends to make around gender are very binary and cis-normative, and that causes a lot of friction for those of us who don't fit into those assumptions. But it's the kind of thing you probably wouldn't even notice if your gender does fit into that binary cis framework. So I can understand why parenting a non-binary kid would be like a light bulb moment for pretty much any cisgender person, and why that parent would go, oh, actually gender isn't as relevant as I always thought it was. So all of that has gotten me thinking about when gender is relevant. What are the situations where it does make sense to acknowledge it? The answer to that is obviously going to be different for everyone because each person's relationship to gender is such an individual thing. But here are some examples that I can think of personally for when gender might actually matter. Number one is discussions about gender inequality. When we live in a patriarchal society, we're going to have issues with gender disparity, and that manifests in things like gender-based discrimination, gender-based pay gaps, systemic inequality in public policy around gender, etc. And we need to be able to name that. We need to be able to say, here are the ways I'm being treated unfairly. Here are the things I need but can't access. Here are the things that harm me and why, because of my gender and its relation to the patriarchy. We need to be able to have those conversations with complexity and nuance. We need to include all kinds of experiences with gender in those conversations, beyond just cis men and cis women. We need to intersect our experiences of gender disparity with our experiences of other forms of disparity, like racism, ableism, homophobia, etc. We unfortunately still have a long way to go before we'll achieve true gender equality, so when I ask myself this question of when is gender relevant, this is the first answer that comes to mind. The second one is discussions about personal safety. Just like the patriarchy leads to gender disparity, it also leads to gender-based violence. And the more marginalized you are by your gender, the less safe you're likely to be. So that's also something it's important to name. Maybe you find that you're safer with people of a certain gender, or you even just feel safer or more comfortable with people of that gender based on past experience. There's a general assumption that people will feel safest with others of their own gender, which may or may not always be true depending on the individual. I think we all know plenty of women who feel safer and actually are safer with other women than with men, for example. But I also know some gay men who feel safer with women than with other men, despite their attraction to other men if they've faced violence from men in the past. As a non-binary person, I tend to feel safer in mixed gender groups than in groups where it's all men or all women and I'm the only NB. When you look at the numbers around acts of violence like murder, homicide, sexual assault, physical assault, statistically, cishet men pose the most danger to everyone else. To women, to non-binary people, even to other men, especially if those men happen to be queer or trans, which again is not exactly unexpected under the patriarchy, right? So when it comes to keeping ourselves safe, gender is unfortunately relevant. Hopefully it won't always be that way. Third is dating situations. For many people, who we're attracted to and who we might want to engage with sexually or romantically is tied to gender. Not for everyone, of course. One of the hallmarks of being pan is that gender doesn't factor into your attraction to others. You could be attracted to anyone regardless of their gender. Also, for some folks on the ace and aro spectrums, gender won't factor in if you're not attracted to anyone. But when you think about other orientations, gender does play a role in who you're attracted to. In any kind of relationship that gets physical, whether that's sexual or sensual or both, the partners aren't just engaging with each other's minds, they're engaging with each other's bodies. So if there's any sort of misalignment between the body you have and the body your partner is expecting you to have based on your gender and what genders they may be attracted to, then it's going to be important to talk about that and make sure you're compatible. This is really common for trans and non-binary people to have to deal with, for intersex people to have to deal with. So because of that, yes, gender is relevant in the context of dating, relationships, hookups, etc., and how we communicate with potential partners about what we're looking for and what we have to offer. The fourth one is healthcare. And I bring this one up because just like any sort of relationship that gets physical, medical situations also involve our bodies. What body parts we have, including our sexual and reproductive organs, will determine what kind of healthcare we need, what kind of blood tests, what kind of screenings, all of that. But our body parts don't exist in a vacuum. If we want good, holistic care, we need to be able to talk to our providers about the relationship between our body parts and our gender. We need to be able to say things like, can you check my hormone levels because something feels off? Maybe it's hair growth, hair loss, libido, whatever, and it's affecting my ability to feel at home in my gender. Telling our providers about our gender gives them better information to help them tailor their care to us. Otherwise, all they have to go on is our body parts and assumptions about what those body parts might mean for our gender. And for those of us who are trans, non-binary, intersex, or otherwise gender non-conforming, assumptions about our healthcare needs based solely on our body parts and not on our gender can cause a lot of harm. Those assumptions can even cause harm to cis people, such as the assumption that all men want to be sexually active or all women want to be mothers. So yes, in healthcare, I think gender is relevant if you want to optimize the quality of care you receive. And my fifth and final answer to this question is any situation where you feel your gender is relevant. Obviously, that's the most nebulous of all my answers, but it's intended to be a catch-all for those times when maybe you try on a new shirt and you're like, I love how masculine this makes me look. Or when you're getting your hair cut and you need to explain to your stylist that you're going for a feminine vibe. Or when you make a post that says, I'm non-binary and here's something I'm dealing with right now. Can any other non-binary people relate? In situations like these, your gender feels relevant to you, so it 100% makes sense for you to bring it up. The key here is that it's when your gender feels relevant, not anyone else's, because your gender is the only one you can really know for sure. And I think that's a good way to frame this whole question. Like I said before, when is gender relevant will have different answers for different people. But if we focus more on when our own gender is relevant and less on when someone else's gender is relevant to us, that will go a long way toward making social interactions better for everyone. We're all conditioned from a young age to sort people into gender categories and interact with them accordingly. But what if we didn't do that? What if we led with our own gender and only brought up other people's gender with their permission, when their gender was actually important and not just because? Perhaps we wouldn't have so much misogyny anymore, so much transphobia anymore. Perhaps we would no longer be steeped in the patriarchy and all the toxic masculinity that goes with it. Perhaps we would finally achieve gender equality, and perhaps we would all have a lot more freedom in how we experience our gender, how we relate to it, how we express it, what clothes we wear, how we decorate our skin or style our hair, how we change our bodies. Perhaps none of us would feel like we have to fit into any sort of gender box to be respected or understood. So my challenge to you with this video is to think about all the times when you would normally bring up someone else's gender, and before you do that, stop and ask yourself, is their gender relevant? Because I think you'll find that most of the time, it's not. If it is, ask yourself, how is their gender relevant? Am I 100% certain what their gender is, or am I just making a guess? Is it really their gender that's relevant right now, or is it actually my own? Because I think those are the kinds of questions that can help us break free of gender expectations and live more authentic lives. And with that, now is where I want to turn the conversation over to you. When do you think gender is relevant? Can you think of any situations beyond the 5 that I named? Are there any times when someone else brought up your gender when it wasn't relevant, and how did that make you feel? Do you find this framing about the relevance of gender helpful for dismantling gender-based oppression? Do you have any ideas about how we can shift away from the relevance of other people's gender and more toward the relevance of our own? And as always, what questions do you have about all this? Drop a comment below and let's get a discussion going. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I'm GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I've got more vlogs like this one about my experiences as a queer person, along with cosplay music videos, cosplay and makeup tutorials, a bunch of cool resources for singers about voice changes on testosterone, and more right here on this channel. So make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. And with that, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for all of your support, happy Pride, and I will see you on the next one.